When our guest today was 9 years old, his brother was arrested for allegedly throwing stones at Israeli soldiers. A year later, soon after his release, he died of internal injuries, the result of torture in Israeli detention. Aziz Abu Sarah grew up in East Jerusalem. He's lived as a second-class citizen amid war, indignity, statelessness. Yet Aziz, who is a National Geographic explorer and tour guide, still believes in a binational state for all, in dialogue with Israelis who want to change the system. Aziz ran for mayor of Jerusalem, even though Israeli law prevents him from doing so. Aziz says he chooses peace over hate, forgiveness over revenge. Is that even possible in the face of occupation and siege, injustice, and, as the International Court of Justice says, plausible acts of genocide? Next up, a unique character who I'm really looking forward to talking to. Aziz Abu Sarah joins the InnerView. Really happy to have Aziz Abu Sarah on the InnerView. Aziz, I'm glad we could catch you in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. Good to talk to you. It must be a difficult time. It must be a real challenge to try and be a peacemaker in these emotional, deadly, divisive times.
Well, thank you, Imran, for having me. Thank you for this interview. And it's important to say, especially in these times, not many people maybe want, or many media outlets want to talk to peacemakers. So it means a lot that you're amplifying our voices. And you're right, these are extremely different time to be obviously a peacemaker. It has been extremely difficult for the last 27 years that I have been engaged in this work in Israel and Palestine, but also I've engaged in this work in many other countries around the world. And what I learned is in the worst moments, and we are in the worst moment when it comes to the reality in Palestine that I have ever witnessed in my life, this is also where we have the greatest chance to make a change. And that's what I am committed to, and that's why we're working very hard to make that change as peacemakers.
You say the worst moment in Palestine, so help me understand the lens through which you actually see what's going on. Tell me, define it for me, describe it for me, so I know exactly how you see what's going on in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories.
So I'll start in the West Bank, where my family are in East Jerusalem in the West Bank, and it is, I cannot tell you the level of fear, the inability to visit each other even because of checkpoints. We are talking about hundreds of checkpoints dividing the Palestinian territory, the West Bank and East Jerusalem, where people can't go from one village to another in some situations. You have daily attacks from settlers, destroying homes, burning homes, shooting at people, beating up people. You have an ethnic cleansing happening in some villages, like in Msafir Yatta and Susia and all these places that are being attacked to push them out of what we call Area C in the West Bank. And then in Gaza, I have many friends in Gaza, and I don't know one of them who hasn't lost multiple people in their families. I don't know one of them whose home has survived. I mean, what we're talking about is a catastrophe. It's a second Nakba for Palestinians, and there is no way to explain how much pain is happening. I have friends who lost 50 people in their family. I have friends who lost 60 people in their family, and it's beyond what we see on television. Let me say, the worst images we see on television don't even tell 1% of the reality of what Palestinians are going through, especially in Gaza.
And with that in mind, how do you actually engage in dialogue with the Israelis? I'm reminded of the Ghassan Kanafani quote, a conversation between the sword and the neck. How do you actually engage? Because people would, a lot of Palestinians and others would look at peacemakers such as yourself and say you are naive when there's such an imbalance going on here.
Yeah, and I understand that. I understand Ghassan Kanafani is somebody who's shaped a lot of my thinking. I've read Ghassan Kanafani growing up, and I went through a lot of rage as a kid. My brother being killed. I grew up seeking revenge. I grew up, I literally stopped going to classrooms and became involved politically as a teenager. So I understand that, and I wanted revenge so bad growing up. But then I realized that Israelis and Palestinians can be partners in liberation, and they can be partners only when there's equality between us. I engage with Israelis and work together, but with those who don't see me as a token, who don't want to use me just to justify certain things or pingwash the reality in the West Bank and in Gaza. But I work with people who truly believe in liberation, who truly believe in coexistence, who truly believe that our future is intertwined and we have to work together. And so, yes, we are angry. You cannot not be angry. I think any peace activist will tell you, oh, we all just love each other and hug each other and we're not angry. That's absolute nonsense. But it's about how we use the anger and how we are most effective. And I think anger is like a nuclear power. You can either use it as a force for destruction, or you can use it as a force for light, as power, and create electricity out of it. And that's exactly what we are doing.
Tell me about the slice of Israeli society that you are engaging with. Where do they come from? What are their thoughts, ideas? How do they see you, and how do they see the conflict?
I'll give you a couple of examples. I'm talking with one of my main partners, Maoz Inon. His parents were killed on October 7th, and I sent him a condolences the next day, and he was one of the first people immediately after October 7th come on TV and says, I don't want revenge. I'm crying for the children in Gaza because I know what's happening there right now as I'm crying for my parents. Another friend is Jonathan Zaigan, whose mother was a friend of mine, was also killed on October 7th. And he's been one of the most outspoken people in Israel against a bombing campaign in Gaza. And there are many, many people like this. They will come with me to the West Bank. These are people who travel with me everywhere. They show up when we are, I was in Jericho recently for a stand, a protest against cutting water to Al-Auja. These are the people who were there, and others like them. Now, we need many more. We need to work together a lot harder. I fully agree to that. But these people, I cannot see them as my enemies. Somebody like Anton Goodman, who days after October 7th was in the West Bank delivering food and water to villages who were being attacked by settlers, putting himself in so much risk because the army wouldn't want him there. The settlers didn't want them there. These are my partners. I don't look at them and say, oh, this is an Israeli, this is a Jewish person. These are my tribe. These are my people.
For a lot of Israelis, if they stopped the bombing, stopped the killing, they wouldn't lose a whole lot. But for a lot of Palestinians, if they stopped what they would call acts of violence or resistance, whether it's, rockets or whatever, there's an existential aspect to it. They feel that they will not exist anymore. How do you talk to them or engage with them on that aspect, no matter how ugly these acts are?
So on a tactical level, I look at fighting weapons-wise. We are no match anywhere to the Israeli firepower. And the destruction in Gaza shows the result of engaging in such fight. I think we have a much, much stronger and better chance of success doing the work I am doing than carrying a gun. That's something I truly believe in. And it's not about, is it our right or not? It's my right to cross the street when I see the green light. But if I see a car coming, it's pretty stupid for me to cross the street at that point. I think it is similar to our case. It's not about, is it right for us, and it's under international right we have the right to carry guns and to fight. I don't think it's the effective way. I would argue we are much more effective. We will achieve much more, not just in negotiations. I don't believe the Palestinian Authority has been able to achieve much through negotiations, but through joint resistance, through joint action, through lobbying and getting people out of their homes. Look, most Palestinians don't even have access, even if they wanted to engage in armed struggle. They don't have access to that kind of struggle. They don't have access to the weapons. They don't have, and even if they had, it's no match to Israel. But all of us can be engaged in resisting in a popular way, in a peaceful way, in joining Israelis and Palestinians together, changing our image together as Israelis and Palestinians working together is the biggest threat against somebody like Netanyahu and Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. That's what scares them the most. This is why they try to shut us down, take away permits from Palestinians who work with Israelis, trying to come and scare these people, doing all kind of laws against us, trying to ban our gatherings and meetings together. There is a reason somebody like Smotrich said Hamas is an asset, but then looks at us and sees us as an enemy, because he knows we are the only way he would lose power. We show Israelis and we show Palestinians, show the world that this whole narrative that Palestinians and Israelis can't live together is not true. We can live together. And, we can live together, I believe, in a binational state. We can live together in a confederation. We can live together in a two-state, although that's becoming next to impossibility. But I see a confederation as a possibility, or a binational state. It's less about even what solution we have. It's more about what values we build that solution on.
Right.
And I believe if we base whatever solution on equality and dignity and safety, often people in the States talk about Israel needs security and Palestinians need freedom. That's not true. Palestinians need security as well. My family needs security too. We all need security and freedom. We all need dignity. We all need to live a normal life. And it's just, for my whole life, I never had that. I used to take an onion with me to school because I was afraid of tear gas. This is the reality we live in, and this is the reality we're trying to change.
Can a binational state only ever work once Israel is prepared to give up the idea of it being exclusively Jewish or dominated by a Jewish identity? I mean, that's a standard answer, right? One state solution, well, no, then you don't have any Israel anymore because it needs to be a Jewish state. Now, with that in mind, given this government that you mentioned, Netanyahu and Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and all of these guys, this sounds like a pipe dream. It sounds, again, like naivety to even mention the one state, given the current circumstances.
Right, it does, but... So what I do a lot in my work, I don't focus much on the one state or on the two states, because I feel the argument about one state and two states kind of lead us into a loophole, this loop that just doesn't lead to anything. I try to focus much more on the values of the solution. And perhaps you get to a one state through first going to a confederation. I think there's a lot of mistrust. Then use I listen to, and then use my Israeli friends listen to are very different. There's so much fear going on. There's this idea that if we live together, we're going to just murder everybody. And so there might be a step in the middle, like a confederation, before people reach a point where they might be willing to accept a reality of a binational or a one state. And maybe we will never get there. I think that's the ideal solution. But I think before we argue what state it should be, we need to change the concept. We need to change what we're building, whatever solution is. I want Israelis to know, I want equality. In whatever way it comes, I'm no less a human being than Israeli, and I want that equality to them. They no less than me. I want to make sure they are safe and I am safe. My nephews, my brothers, my mother, my father, my parents don't want to live in a place where there's a tear gas on a daily basis. This is what we focused on. And the concept of equality is really important. So you mentioned who's the Israelis I deal with. Even when we talk together, we talk about our pain in similar way. If I talk about my brother being killed, my Israeli partner will talk about his parents being killed. If I say my brother was murdered, he'll say his parents were murdered. And this is important because so often, especially when we go to Europe or to the United States speaking together, often people will refer to my brother as died and refer to the Israeli as murdered. And the equality starts with the language, where my Israeli partner saying, no, we will refer to what we went through the same way we refer to what you went through. That's just a beginning of where that equality starts on a personal level. It means they have to show up when there are things happening in the West Bank and Gaza, which that's happening all the time. And they have to be educated. They have to be engaged. They have to push governments both in Israel, but also, I mean, I've come to believe that change will not happen by Israelis and Palestinians alone. We have to push the international community together. If I go and speak to the British, to the French, to the European Parliament, to the, right now the American situation is a lot different. But if I go and speak to those communities and leaders alone, in most cases, unfortunately, they don't listen. If I go and talk about sanctioning someone like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, if I go and talk about funds to UNRWA, they don't listen to somebody like me because I'm Palestinian. I'm biased in their mind. But when I show up with my Israeli partners, I can tell you, doors open and they listen, and those things happen. And I've seen it happening when we met Pope Francis. I've seen it happening when we met people in the European Parliament, even when we met members of Congress, members of the Senate, where there's a lot more openness when I come and talk about Palestinian rights and my Israeli colleague is standing and saying we are in the same path.
But in a way, that's very revealing, right? You have to take your Israeli along with you in order for people to listen to you. And again, you said the international community is crucial here. Israel-Palestine is sort of a passion play for a lot of people, where they project their ideologies and there's no other situation in the world. Like the situation in Congo, not everybody in the world has deep cultural, historical, religious, etc. connections to it that then influences that prism, right? The lens. So whether it's people who look at it purely from a religious lens, Jews versus Muslims and some Christians, apocalyptic religion, whether it's leftists who see it only through a kind of settler colonial lens, whether it's right-wingers who see needing to support Israel in order for the rapture, for Jesus to come back. And then, anyway, the Jews will be killed anyway at the end, according to that sort of warped. So, I wonder, isn't that, to what extent is that the ultimate frustration? Because no matter what you're doing on the ground, everybody on the outside always has a different lens through which they're looking at this, and their influence matters whether you like it or not.
Yeah, I fully agree. And what you just said, you're absolutely right that it's not fair or right that people will listen to me more when I have my Israeli colleague with me. But that's the prism in which they look at the reality there, at the conflict, at all of that. They have much in most political world, definitely in the U.S., the Israeli story, they know it. They don't know the Palestinian story. They don't know the Palestinian narrative. They don't know what's going on to most people, even to politicians there. They don't. And so we try to talk to them from the point of view of where they are at the moment. But that does need to change. I can try to go alone, and unfortunately, many places in the world, a Palestinian alone won't be able to achieve something. So I think more practical. Where can we really create a change? And not, in the beginning you mentioned many people say I'm naive. Naive being I'm going to go and do what I think should be done, regardless if it's successful or not. I don't do that. I am trying to cause influence. I am trying to change policies. I am trying to push for governments to change the way they're dealing with Israel and Palestine, talking about not sending weapons. This is something, I think it is much more important than Israelis with me saying, I don't want the United States to send weapons to Israel, than a Palestinian saying it, because he's telling them about his country. Don't send weapons to my own country. That is something powerful. So when I go with an Israeli, it does create a much more, it creates a model for these politicians that they never seen before. I've been in so many meetings, I cannot tell you how many times, and people will look at us and say, I never imagined an Israeli and a Palestinian coming together and speaking in one voice and having a vision. One thing that we lack terribly in these days, we're all talking about ceasefire, but ceasefire isn't the goal. Ceasefire isn't the end game. We talk about a vision beyond the ceasefire. We talk about actual peace where both Israelis and Palestinians have that. We are not talking about it also in 50 years. I don't know if I'll be alive in 50 years. I want to see it in my lifetime. Heck, I want to see it in the next few years. That's the vision we're doing. And it might sound crazy, but look, I've been to 80 countries around the world. I worked in many, many conflict zones. This is my career, working in conflicts and trying to do mediation. And I've seen places where everybody said there'll never be peace. I've been in Northern Ireland. Everyone said in '94 when there was negotiations with Israelis and Palestinians, and everybody said Palestine will be solved, but never Northern Ireland. 5 years later, Northern Ireland has a peace agreement, and we don't. I've worked in Colombia for a long time, and the same thing. If you talked to Colombia 20 years ago, everyone said this place is damned forever. It will never reach a peace agreement. And the guy who was leading the effort to fight the FARC is the guy who signed the peace agreement. Right. So I have a strong faith that regardless how bad things are, it can change.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting also because I've been to Northern Ireland, I've been to Colombia, and I've been to the Balkans. And so whether it's the peace deal with the FARC or the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland or Dayton in Bosnia, it's like a bit ugly also. It's a bit miserable, and there's segregation and there's trauma and there's pain. So maybe also part of this whole thing, and maybe back to this idea of a kind of utopia, dystopia, people feel that peace needs to be absolutely perfect, where everybody is fundamentally thrilled by it and living their best lives. No, peace is ugly and weird, and there's a lot of hate still, but there's no killing, and there's no, I guess, injustice of privileging one community over another. Is that, practically speaking, do you hope to see that in your lifetime?
Yeah, absolutely. I was in Northern Ireland recently, and one of my colleagues and friends, Amira Mohammed, said, she said, there's nothing poetic about the peace agreement there. There's still problems. It's not perfect. But in comparison to where things were 30 years ago, wow. Now, working for justice and working for equality, it's a lifetime thing. But we need to start somewhere, and we need an agreement to set up a framework for that to happen. And yes, I understand, even if we have an agreement tomorrow, things not going to be utopian and perfect tomorrow. But it will create for us a framework for us to work toward justice, toward equality, and it will take a decade, it'll take 2 decades, it'll take 3 decades. We will work hard. I think harder work of peacemakers happen after an agreement.
But interestingly, and sorry to interrupt you, because we are running out of time, given the nature of this, and we've spoken about everybody wanting a piece of the pie and everybody's influence, for good or for bad from around the world, even if there is a political agreement, even rubber-stamped by all the great powers, whether it's the United States and the Russians and the Chinese and the Europeans and whoever, and all the Arab states, the Saudis and the Egyptians and, Turkey and everybody, even if there's that, and you've got the PA and Hamas and Netanyahu and Israeli leftists and all of them agreeing on something, given the emotions that underpin everything here, and the trauma, the deep pain and suffering, will that even last? That's the kind of depressing question.
My answer is yes, and I can tell you why. I've been to 2 countries where I've seen similar trauma, maybe a lot worse, Cambodia and Rwanda. I've spent time in both of these countries, and I've met people who have reconciled even with people who've raped them, people who've killed their entire family. And I can tell you, even as a peacemaker, I struggled. I was sitting there and thinking, how? And I look at 1 million people being killed, maybe more, in Rwanda, and how the country was able to come out of the ashes and rebuild, and looking at where it is today, or looking at Cambodia, gives me hope. I think if there is no agreement in the soon future, things gonna get significantly worse. The people who've lost everything they had, they need something to believe in. And if we don't give them something to believe in, then they're gonna end up fighting. They're gonna end up going to violence. And I don't think there's a way to convince them not to, unless we create a political process that actually shows them a future that is different. Unless we create for them a vision, a hope. You know, we're mentioning Bible and Quran and interfaith and all of that. There's a verse in the Bible that says, without vision, people perish. Without vision, without a dream, without believing in a political process, people are going to pick up arms. I fully understand that. And we have maybe 5 years. If we don't create a real change in the next 5 years to give those kids that are in my age when my brother was killed, we don't give them something to cling to hang to, a hope to believe in, are we in for much worse than what we have today, and it will be 10 times harder to try to solve our conflict in 20 years than it is now. Just like it's a lot harder today than 20 years ago. So that's why I look at people and say, I know you think what I'm doing is naive. However, trust me, if we continue in this path, there'll be much, much more death and much more pain, and it's not worth it.
Aziz, I'm going to ask Melis for your number so we can stay in touch, because I really want to continue this conversation.
And I want you to travel with me to Colombia.
Yeah, and I'd love you to actually, I'm South African, I'd love you to visit South Africa because I want your thoughts.
I've been,
oh, you've been?
I run
okay.
tours in South Africa.
Okay, brilliant. So
I will come with you there.
Okay.
But I run tours where I bring black, white, colored people to work together on a tour and have those discussions with each other.
Okay, so I'd love to join and be a part of it. Looking forward to it. Let's keep in touch.
Let's connect.
And it's been a pleasure talking to Aziz Abu Sarah. Great to have you on the interview. Wish you all the best.